I have no system. I have no system. I only have instincts. I have my sort of church-going Baptist childhood that wasn't very strict. I mean, my parents were not that religious as people when they grew up, but they decided they wanted their children at least to be going to church. My mother had left the Catholic Church, and my father had been raised Protestant, which really just meant playing tennis on Sundays.
Sounds lovely.
Yeah, he was fine with it, but my mother said, I think we should join a church and we should raise our kids in a church. That's just proper, she thought. So they went church shopping, and they went to all the churches in our little town, and they decided that they liked the Baptist church because it didn't believe in baptizing babies before they understood what they were getting into. You were baptized, quote unquote, as an adult. So I was baptized when I was 11, I think. And they liked that idea that the child ostensibly the adult, the older child, is choosing the religion. So I was raised a Baptist, and my father started to read the Bible every night at dinner, and he was very interested in it as literature, as philosophy, as ethical and spiritual guidance. And so we were raised that way. My mother eventually, once we were all adults, she sort of stopped going to church. She just really didn't buy any of it anymore. My father kept going, surprisingly, right up until the end of his life. He was still going to church, and he didn't always agree with what the minister said, but he liked the ritual. He liked, being part of a congregation. He liked singing in a choir and different things like that. I think at the end of his life he was the treasurer of the church. He was trying to, he was part of keeping the church going, the little church in his town where they were living at the end of their lives. So what do I have? I have a Christian, there's certain things about Christianity that I think are beautiful. There's different things in every religion I think are beautiful. Am I strictly speaking attached to a religious institution? No. And so the book that I wrote is really more about the psychological aspects of dealing with grief, dealing with the possibility of an afterlife, the possibility of resurrection. But it's not done in a religious way. It's really done in an emotional and psychological way, because primarily it's a love story and a ghost story, sort of. But it's about how difficult it is to let go of people you lose, and how unbelievable it is that they are no longer around. And so this main character takes his disbelief and goes on an adventure with it. And there's another, the 19th century narrative strand, of course, also has a slight disbelief in the death of someone. In that case, it's the disbelief in the death of John Wilkes Booth, which was quite rampant in the South in the 19th century. People claimed they had seen him. People claimed to be him. And there is some iffiness about what perhaps happened to him.
Okay, so that's interesting. And I think for people who are listening who haven't had a chance to read, we should note that in your new novel, you are not necessarily alternating in a literal way, but you are going back and forth between voices. There is a voice written in, I believe you would describe it as a postbellum. Is that the right term? I
don't actually know. Someone has used that term. I mean, yeah, I would say that's probably right. Yeah.
So 19th century, after the Civil War, you are writing in a Southern dialect. And you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of watching Ken Burns' Civil War documentary. I don't know if you... Yeah, because there would be these lovely letters written from soldiers to their mothers or whatever from the front in the Civil War. And what I would always laugh about when I was watching that documentary is how, like, any random soldier, it seems, based on what plays in that documentary, is a better writer than I am. Like, they just write these lovely letters. There was something
They
about
wrote
that era.
beautiful letters. They wrote
Yeah.
beautiful letters, and then they had actors read them. And there was also that famous diary. And Julie Harris was the voice for that famous diary. Oh, and I'm blanking on it, but I did read the entirety of that diary, which is also a beautiful diary. That diarist then later tried to turn her diary into a novel because she felt it would be more successful somehow. She died too soon before she finished it, and it's widely thought that Margaret Mitchell kind of stole a lot from it for Gone with the Wind. But
Interesting.
but Julie Harris does the voice of that famous diarist who's I'm just blanking on her name.
Well,
Sorry.
but I'm interested, as I was reading, I was like, wow, Lorrie's really found a way to channel this period and this voice. And it sounds like you did some research. I was wondering how you built that particular language. There had to be some source material that you were using to sort of get the music in your mind. There are terms that are very era specific, and I'm wondering how you arrived at that.
I conjured this character, and then once I had the character in my mind, because I also had the voices from research I had done, and also because I live in Nashville, and Southerners speak in a very picturesque way. I mean, Nashville's a mix of Northerners and Southerners, but I just could hear I could hear this character's voice in my head. So it was more summoning of her and just running with her. There are some readers who've gone through and thought there were some anachronisms. Um, for instance, I use the word I made it up. I use the word stranger splain, but splain is a Southernism that goes way back centuries. It's not people just associate it with mansplain now, but it splain was used all the time. It's kind of slangy, and was used in the 19th century. So I made up stranger splain, but some people have objected to that. I also use the term sting operation, and I did some research on that, and but she's using it not in the conventional idea of what a sting operation is, but just like there's a sting to what she's done. So you can argue that term is okay to use because it's being used a little differently. But I was surprised when I looked up sting operation that it's such a recent term, because it can't be a recent idea. A sting operation. Sting operations must have been around for centuries.
But the
But
but the term itself.
the term comes from the 70s, supposedly. Or at least the internet. That's all it can trace it back to. So in other words, what I'm saying is there may be some mistakes, but because I was mostly working from my imagination after having read a lot of diaries and letters.
Okay, and those sections, those chapters of the novel are epistolary. They're written in this
Right,
woman Elizabeth's hand. She's writing to
right,
someone and is, basically just talking in her own voice. And then we also, in other chapters, follow the story of a man named Finn, who is, how do I put this? Awash in death. I mean, like, so much law. He's surrounded by loss, basically, and is
I know.
grappling with it, and is a very sympathetic character.
Oh,
And
good. I'm glad you like him. I like him
yeah,
too.
yeah. He's trying his best. Is the feeling that I have about him.
Yeah.
He's trying to make sense of life and death, as we all do, especially when things get rocky. And I read where you said something to the effect of, death was on your mind when you wrote the book. You had known a lot of people that had died, and you thought to yourself, like, how can we accept this?
Right.
You alluded to this earlier. Like, you're trying to write about characters who are trying to keep people alive, and that is very much what Finn is up to as he deals with his brother, and his brother Max's fatal illness, and then also the loss of his ex-girlfriend Lily to suicide. But we then find out that she's maybe not quite dead, and it becomes a kind of ghost story. So that's the general setup, right?
Right. Or you could call it a climate change novel too, because it seems like she's thought out.
Yeah.
Didn't quite get into the deep freeze of death. There's been a slight thaw, and suddenly there she is.
And you are not shy about depicting the physicality of death and Lily's condition. Mm-hmm. Like, you really don't spare the reader anything. It's she's rotting. She's got the breath of death. Her skin is translucent. All this stuff that goes along with dying, which is astonishing. It's one of these things that, especially in Western culture, we sort of don't see unless it's really immediately upon us. But this is what happens, and
right.
Your book does not flinch from that.
Right. When people get sick and are dying or are in hospice, you can see them on their way to that unfortunate condition. And I just kept going in my mind what I imagined would happen to a body that is both trying to stay alive and trying to die. And there's some back and forth. Sometimes some moments she looks better than others. But it's also supposed to be a testament to Finn's great love for her. That none of this stuff is really getting in the way. So I said to my editor, because I thought the book was getting. I thought men would love this book, and it turns out all the bad reviews have come from men. And my editor said, "Well, that's because men like a woman not to have bugs and worms in her hair."
Silverfish? Those are like the little...
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk to you about the critical response to this book, just insofar as it goes with people commenting on the difficulty of the subject matter, the way that, I think, as you've even put it, it might be a book that you need to reread, or at least in certain sections stop and kind of rewind and go back. It's a book that defies easy categorization. I'm just going to read to you just some brief snippets, and then we can kind of discuss. Ron Charles says, it feels more like a seance than a novel. David Ulin calls it a metaphysical meditation. Parul Segal.
David Ulin's review was good. I exclude him from the group of male reviewers who didn't get it. But, Ron, unfortunately, didn't get it. Oh, well.
So Parul Segal says it's a, quote, a work of such determined strangeness and pain. I really latched onto the phrase determined strangeness, and we'll discuss that in a second. Dwight Gardner, fluky, fitfully funny, and folk horror adjacent. Maggie Doherty in the New Republic, who wrote a review that I quite liked, says Moore's fiction is becoming... Oh, no, that's Dan Cois, or how do you pronounce his last name? Cois, okay. Moore's fiction is becoming ever stranger, ever naughtier, ever more devoted to a project increasingly at odds with literary trends. Maggie Doherty in the New Republic says, doesn't have the antic energy of Moore's early novels. The pacing is slow, the tone is muted, questioning, almost sincere. So there's a wide range of responses, and I'm wondering if this is what you intended. Does it surprise you the way that the book has been received? I know you mentioned earlier that a lot of the not so hot reviews have come from men, but has anything about the way this book has landed surprised you?
I knew it would be a hard book because it's a weird book, and I knew it would get. I said to my editor in advance that it's going to get mixed reviews. Just brace yourself. I was very some writers say they don't read their reviews, but I review myself. I'm sometimes a book reviewer. And so I'm interested in how people try to grapple with a book and how they take it on and how to do it. And I frankly would not have wanted to review this book. I think this book would be very hard to review. So I am intrigued by people who take it on and try to do the hard work of reviewing it. And I do feel a range of effort. Like some reviewers are not trying that hard, they just throw up their hands. And others are really trying. Parul Sehgal, I think, is really trying. A whole bunch of others were really trying. Whether they really got everything or not, or whether I could even understand what they were saying, probably doesn't matter, but I could feel that they were really trying. And I find that very moving, that you never want your readers to just dismiss your book and just throw up their hands. You want them to try to read it. And a couple of reviewers, there was one in England who said he read it 3 times. And the first time he didn't like it, the second time it was growing on him, by the third time he said he was devastated by it in a good way. But for a reviewer to read a book 3 times, that impressed me and that surprised me.
You know what I was thinking as I was reading it? Like the comparison that I was drawing in my mind was when I listened to an album, which I don't do nearly enough anymore, but I'm thinking back to like listening to certain albums that on the first listen, I was like, what is this? Like I just, it threw me. Like I was just kind of like, ah. And then on subsequent listens, it just grows on you and becomes, and those are kind of the best albums.
Yeah.
And this worked on me in an odd way. It has and to continue the musical comparison, it has an odd music to it, like word by word, line by line. And I found myself, as a writer, thinking to myself, like, how did she do this? Like every sentence just has like, it's just a slightly like what offbeat. I don't even know how to, I'm not a very good musical person, but you know what I'm saying? Like in the composition of it, this is just how you write and it flowed out of you? Or were you consciously like, no, I'm going to try to do something like new and different here that I haven't done before, or I'm going to try to make this strange music. Do you know what I'm saying? Like how conscious was it?
Well, in the Finn sections, I'm just tracking Finn. And so I know his mind is not conventional, but it was easy for me to keep company with it. And I'm also writing to an inner ear where the language both reflects what I want to communicate and also reflects the character's consciousness. And, I think a writer always has to find that happy medium between the sentence they want to write and the sentence that the character would think. And you find a kind of language that is in between. And Finn is not a far cry from my own consciousness, so it wasn't that hard. But I am writing to an inner ear that is a sort of musical ear, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I think I read somewhere, someone asked you about like who you're writing to or who your ideal reader is. And what you said was interesting to me. You said that you're writing to your narrator.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's who you imagine. You imagine the narrator of your book as the reader reading it and commenting on it, and you want to try to stay true to that narrator and to try to please that narrator. That is something I have not heard before.
Right. The narrator has to, because when you look over at what you've written, if the narrator says that word is wrong, that's not part of, or this sentence doesn't work as part of my narrative, or part of its narrative, or part of whatever gender you want to give the narrative, because the narrative voice is not precisely the character unless you're in first person, and it's not precisely the author. It is this other presence, and it's the book. It's basically the book talking to you. And so the book will tell you that's not how I would say it, or that's not right, or whatever. So I want to please the story.
Right.
The storyteller has to be um, your first reader and your best reader, and the the reader that you have to sort of report into. It's not other people in the world. It's this other presence in the book that you have to report into. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And then
Okay.
to continue a little bit with this musical train of thought, I know that in your youth you were very affected by what, church choir, opera. You play the piano. You can sing, I believe. You have some musical ability.
Oh,
And
I think maybe I used to. It's all evaporated now. I
but
had
I
to be
mean,
on stage last night with Suzy Roach, and I just felt so embarrassed because we're about the same age, and her voice is so strong and beautiful still.
you
So
got to you got to use it, right, to keep it. Is that the thing?
yeah, yeah, use it or lose it. But yeah, but she was obviously more gifted than I ever was from the beginning. So, but yeah, music has meant a lot to me. It has meant a lot to me. I just wish, but my use of music really now goes into writing, I guess you would say.
But you had these experiences that were formative in your youth, where you would what, go to practice. There was like church plays or some sort of theater, musical theater that was put on by
There
the
was
church in your
musical,
hometown.
yeah, there was musical theater that my parents were involved in it a little, not in a big way, but a little way. And, I was always in choirs. And when I was a child, my friends and I, we would all just get together and sing or play and then in high school we'd get together and play guitars after school. Now kids are so middle class kids all focused on their, homework and their college applications. It's all so sad. But we would get together and play the guitar, play the piano. We were singing, and music was just something we just did for fun. We didn't do it as an activity to put down on our college applications.
Right.
But yeah, music, and my father was very musical. Um, and composed things. He composed things, and we got them written down. And he wrote for a choir years ago that would sing his pieces, and one of his pieces is so beautiful. I just can't believe how beautiful it is. So I hope we don't lose the score to that, and we keep it around because it's a very lovely piece.
That's a great thing to
Um,
have.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And and my grandmother was a singer. She went to the New England Conservatory. She was a real, you know, classically trained singer. My grandfather was an excellent pianist, sort of concert level pianist. He used to give concerts actually, little concerts, little provincial concerts at the college he worked at. But um, so yeah, music. I think music used to be in people's lives generally a little more before we all had headphones and stereos and took music off privately to ourselves. It used to be you'd get together and do things musically. I mean, musicians still do that, obviously, real musicians. But it used to be you could be just a rank amateur and get together in an unembarrassed fashion and play guitar and sing and do all that.
Do you think
So
that it gives you? Do you think that this background and this sort of like you know genetic tradition in your family of musical people has given you, I don't know, maybe like a better ear as a writer? Like you feel like your approach to writing is maybe more musical than the average person. Do you see it that way?
well, I think I have a musical ear. I just wish I had a musical voice in the world. I mean, I my my mother would be told by my music teachers, "Oh, Lori has a very good ear." But I could never, what I really wanted to be was a singer, and I didn't have a really good voice. But so the voice I hear when I write or when I write to my inner ear, is nothing that I can create. with my voice. It's just a kind of mental voice. Um, Last night, James Naughton read a section of the novel, and I don't know if you know him. He's done a lot of musical theater. He was in City of Angels. Did you ever see that or know of
Mm-mm.
that?
No.
Musical about LA. But he has a great deep voice, and he read so beautifully. Everyone was so stunned. And it was really, I suddenly felt like a songwriter who had written a song and then was hearing it transformed by a singer, and that the song no longer belonged to the writer. It now belonged to the singer, which is what happens with songs. Songs sort of, if a singer can really sing it well, they own that song. And, they can often become muses to the composer and all of that. But I suddenly thought, wow, James Naughton now owns this section of the book. It was so beautiful to listen to.
Well, yeah, no, it's I've heard through the years, like in reading interviews with musicians, that one of the things that musicians love most of all is when other musicians cover their work. It's such a like it's a
Yeah.
thrill. It's a thrill, especially when it's done well.
If it's done well, if it's not done well, it can't possibly be a thrill.
Right,
But
right, right.
it can't.
If
But
I
it's
cover
done.
it, yeah. But when
If
it's
it's done well, it's just taken away from you and becomes this other thing that you get to experience totally anew. And that's the experience I just had last night.
that's great. And
Yeah, that's great.
along these same lines, I think somebody has asked you who the ideal reader is for you and who you wish would read your book. And your answer, again, struck me. You said someone who loves to make operas out of novels.
Yeah, because I sort of feel this book as an opera,
Why?
and that it could be made into an opera, because it's got a lot of arias and duets, and it's got a sense of tragedy and theatricality, and it could be made into an opera, I do believe, but someone would have to write the music for it. So I think I said in answer to that question, Massenet, because Massenet did write a number of operas based on novels. Um, I'm not sure who else has, but I'm sure there are others.
And you're a fan of opera.
Yeah, I mean the way. Yeah, I'm not an expert, but yes, I'm an enthusiastic fan. Yeah.
It's powerful. I've only been in I've never been to an opera. I don't
What?
think. No, I have
Really?
not.
You have to go.
But I have been in a room. I was at like a poetry reading, and people
Hmm.
were kind of doing their spoken word, and everybody was like snapping. This was years ago when I was young. And then an opera singer got up in this. It was like in a loft space, and I
Hmm.
was sitting on the floor in the front row,
Uh-huh.
and she was like 3 feet from me, and singing like right over the top of my head, and it was so loud and so powerful that I wept. That's
Oh,
not
you can.
uncommon, right?
Oh, that's why you go to operas. You go to just cry. You forget that's why you go, but then yeah, because it hits some part of you, and you have this sort of release. I wonder what she was singing. Do you remember that what aria she was singing?
No, I don't. I don't.
Maybe
I
she
just,
didn't either.
yeah, I was just so impressed. I mean, it's just amazing to me the vocal instrument that these people have, the volume they can hit, the power of it. I don't think I fully understood, until it happened three
Yeah,
feet from me. But it's,
yeah,
another
yeah.
one
They
of my
were.
gaps. I've got to go to an opera.
Well, start with Puccini. That's the most accessible, and and then you can wander away and do some harder ones and some more boring ones. But then you can come back to Puccini. I think it sort of begins and ends with Puccini. He's such a genius, and the music is just unfailingly. I mean, there's if you've never been to an opera, you still will understand everything that's being sung. I think.
So I want to talk to you about this. Like you just kind of alluded to it, but there was something that one of the reviews that I read brought to my attention, which made me go, "Oh, like I wonder about this." And it has to do with the twos in this novel, the way that you have two siblings in mourning, two seducers, two women whose dead bodies are, going, I guess, what is it? They are or soon will be, in Elizabeth's words, quote, put to good use. But there are lots of pairs. And was that something that you were conscious of while you were writing it, or was it something that it came to your attention the same way it came to mine, like after the fact?
Well, I knew that the two strands were talking to each other and that they had echoes, and that there was a lot of twinning across these centuries with various things. There's also two Jacks. There's a lot of things that are a kind of twinning of the narrative strands. This the closeness of the siblings and the idea of the love one has, sort of failed love for one sibling. I put in there obviously very, very consciously from the beginning. But then as I went through, there were other little, doublings that I just sprinkled in. But yeah, I put all that deliberately in there. Yeah.
And this theme of sibling love and failed sibling love and the way that we fail to maybe show up for one another, even the people we are closest to. Mm-hmm. This resonates with me, but it's also something that has been at least somewhat of a concern in all of your novels, if I'm not mistaken. Like, this is a recurring theme for you.
It is. It is. Now that I didn't really realize until I'd gotten to the end of this one and realized, wait a minute, I did this a little bit in A Gate at the Stairs. I did it in Who Were on the Frog Hospital and Anagram. So I only have 4 novels, but they all have sibling relationships where the protagonist turns their back a little bit on their sibling in order to embark on a more fanciful kind of romantic love. And I didn't realize that was my sense of story in all 4 novels until I finished this one too. So I guess it's my slight dubiousness about romantic love, and yet also a sense that that romantic love is sort of astonishing and amazing and irresistible, but it may take you away from other kinds of responsibilities.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. Like, I will sometimes feel aggrieved. I've had moments in my life, as I think most of us do, where you're like, where are people? Like, I'm struggling here, and like, where are people? That feeling.
Oh.
But then
you can call me. You have my number now.
Okay, good. You better be careful. I'll be like, Lorrie, help me. But I also will usually quickly realize that I myself fail, and probably fail in ways that I don't even realize. It's just one of the it's one of those things about the human experience that nobody has clean hands. We all fail to show up for each other so much.
We all have guilty consciences about something or other, and more than one thing, I'm sure. We're all just imperfect, and then haunted by those pieces of guilt and imperfection. That's life.
But it's enough of a conundrum that you've written about it in all of your novels. I mean, it's
right. And I do have the main character in this novel take his guilt. He has a little bit of guilt. He takes it and tries to do something with it. Tries to, he's doing good work, holding dying people's hands at the end of the book. He's trying to give back something he didn't quite succeed in doing before. So there are little compensatory things that characters try to do when they have, and people try to do when they have failed at something large. Then they try to do a collection of other things in compensation.
Yeah, I found myself, and you're referring to Finn, volunteering and doing hospice work.
Right.
And I have to confess, when I read that, I was like, I wonder if Lorrie's ever done that. It's one of those things I've actually thought about. Like, what a lovely thing to do. I think maybe if I have to be, or if I'm going to be totally honest, there's an element of self-interest. Like, I think I need to be in closer confrontation with death. It'll make me have a better perspective on life, and it'll maybe diminish my fear if I get right up and see it. But I think also it's just a lovely, giving thing to do, especially when people are alone in this last stage of life. Have you ever volunteered in this way?
I'm not even sure that kind of volunteer work is possible. I
Oh,
assume it is. I made it up.
oh,
I haven't
okay.
done it.
Okay.
I mean, but I was thinking if I were in hospice, I wouldn't mind a perfect stranger coming and holding my hand. I mean, we do know that you can volunteer to hold babies um, in hospitals when the parents can't be there. I mean, that's I know people who've done that volunteer work. I don't know about the hospice volunteer work. I just assume that somewhere that work exists, and but I haven't investigated or done it myself. But I've imagined it, and I imagined it for Finn.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I'm trying to think. My grandmother had dementia, and she was in a nursing home in her last stage of life, and she passed away. I know they'll have people come play music, or they'll have volunteer people come in and like entertain or sit with
Right,
people. But
right.
one of the most touching things about her, like the very end of her life, was that it was like in the middle of the night, I want to say, when she passed away, and the nurse who was on staff who was with her sang to her. It's like this
Well,
lovely Southern woman who like sang to my grandmother, and I was like, oh, I'm happy that happened.
yeah, if I were to rewrite this novel, maybe I'd have him singing. That would be maybe better, because they have found that, especially with older people who are in cognitive decline, that the singing doesn't go away, that the music is still in there. With people who have terrible Alzheimer's, they can suddenly burst into song. They remember the lyrics, they remember the songs, so the music can really still be conjured. But there are music therapists who come into um, to homes for people with Alzheimer's, and then have big music sessions. It's beautiful.
Yeah,
I've
I mean,
I've
I'm
seen
thinking
footage
now.
of it. I've,
I'm thinking now about this woman singing to my grandmother, and I guess it is
yeah.
somewhat contingent upon how good of a voice she had. like, if I'm singing to you at the end, it might not be great,
Oh,
But I think
I don't think the quality matters that much.
maybe, especially not at that point. But I
No.
want to talk to you about the time frame, the time that this novel is set in, which I believe is 2016,
Hmm.
and the political context for this novel, because there is a political element. It's like it's a death haunted story, but it's also a political story. It's a story about, like, you alluded to John Wilkes Booth a couple of times, and how I get, in the South, people doubted that he had died, and there was a lot of conspiracy theory around that. I want to say too that I read that part of that element of your novel was inspired by, was it a man in the 19th century who had like a mummified body that he was carting
Yeah.
around the American South saying that it was John Wilkes Booth? I had not heard that story.
Oh, yeah. But he was doing it into the 20th century. Well into the 20th century. He took the body of someone who had confessed several times. This guy had confessed several times to being John Wilkes Booth. There were a number of people who did that because there was the sense that the Confederacy was still somehow alive, and Booth was ostensibly a hero to the Confederacy, and it's so hard to contemplate. Um, but yeah, there was this Memphis lawyer who had his eye on this guy, and as soon as this guy died, he took the body, mummified it, and brought him around to carnivals to make. Yeah, the eye color was not correct, so that was inconvenient, and so he glued the eyes shut.
But
So
I mean,
that guy. The mummy was not. John Wilkes Booth. But people paid money thinking it was, and he was dressed up as John Wilkes Booth. Um, and eventually the mummy went missing. By the 1960s, the lawyer's family didn't know where the mummy was. They might have just tossed it in the trash. I don't know what they did. It's so
But this
crazy.
was, yeah, it's crazy. But if this was part of the inspiration, or I mean, this was something that inspired you as you were writing this novel, and the
Hmm.
ways in which the times that we have been living through have seen this resurgence of, how should we put it, the Confederate impulse.
Yeah,
I,
absolutely.
so
Confederacy is kind of still there. Yeah, it's has a slightly different shape and it's sprinkled around the country a little differently, but yeah, it's there.
and this is, there's a grief, I think. I mean, there's obviously grief at the heart of this novel, and the grief has to do with the loss of loved ones most centrally. But I think that with all of the political tumult that we have been living through, grief is a big part of it that maybe doesn't get foregrounded as much as it should. That was my experience of it. There's a lot of grief
Yeah.
associated with what this country has gone through over the past several years, and just how crazy things have gotten. And I think it's like a
There-
grief for the present and the future. It's like, what are we doing now? Where have we been? Where are we going? It's all of that.
Well, if you look at the past 250 years of this country, I mean, it's a relatively young country, and the last 250 years have been crazy. The whole history of this country is crazy and violent and tragic, and you know there are many, many things we still haven't recovered from. I spent 4 months in Berlin this past winter and spring, and I wanted, and they're still processing so much. It's not just the Nazis and the Holocaust that they're processing, because that is so huge, and for young people, I mean, someone told me about a 7 year old, his 7 year old nephew, who, when told about the Holocaust, he said, "What? You're making that up. You're just making that up. That couldn't have happened." So it's really so difficult to believe. But for young people, so all of that is being processed. But also the reunification of the city is really complicated, and people are still talking about it and dealing with it. These side by side countries that were, you know, right next to each other with a wall in between, and it was really profound and weird. There was no other city in the world that was quite like that, and they're still dealing with that. There were many, many East Germans and East Berliners who were very idealistic about their socialist experiment, and who are still mourning in some ways the triumph of capitalism, and others do not feel that way. But there's a lot of conversation, a lot of grappling. It's complicated and interesting.
You feel tension, like in addition? I mean, is there like the kind of tension that we might see here in the States between the Confederate impulse and a more progressive contemporary impulse? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, is there any like hints of violence that you felt when you were there?
Well, the hints of violence sort of come from a different direction. That comes from, the fascistic edges, the lunatic fringe there. But the conversation between the East and the West is really about um, it's about citizenship. Don't you want the best society possible, or do you just want to be a customer? You know, and East Germans who are still like believers in their system feel they've been turned into customers, and so there's that conversation, and it's really just so close up because the city itself was divided that way.
Hmm.
Um, and so they talk a lot about the blue jeans and bananas of the West, and that socialism was sold out for blue jeans and bananas. I mean, there's a lot of shorthand for what happened there, but there's also a sort of ongoing. absorption, processing of what happened. Many young people who are, say, like in their 30s, saw their parents fired from their jobs as soon as the wall came down because the Western the West German companies came in, took over the industry, and performed efficiencies. There was a lot of redundant employment. And so people lost their jobs, and then the family fell apart because the father didn't have a job anymore, that kind of thing. So there's lots of mixed kinds of memories. There's also, the whole Stasi, the presence of the Stasi, and that's a very complicated situation too. So at any rate, it was interesting for me to spend some time in another country that's haunted in a different way from the things that haunt this country.
But did it make you see the United States in a new or different light? Did it illuminate anything that you hadn't seen before about what's been happening here by being there?
It didn't clarify anything, but it just made me realize that history doesn't go away in 10 years. It may not go away at all. It just sort of burrows under and takes runs for shelter and then takes a slightly different form.
Well, something that I thought about as I was reading your novel and as I was reading the parts of the book and considering the parts of the book that are connected to what we've just been discussing has to do with your own travels in life and the fact that you are from upstate New York and then moved to Madison, Wisconsin. Spent some time in New York City, but you're a New Yorker, then to Wisconsin, which is the state of my birth and where I spent part of my childhood.
Is that right? Why didn't I know that? Where were you born?
I was born in Milwaukee, and I grew up in Cedarburg, in a little town called Cedarburg, north of Milwaukee.
They make cheese there, right? Cedarburg cheese?
Probably.
No.
They make cheese everywhere, I feel like.
They make cheese everywhere, too, but I think there's a particular creamery there. Where in Milwaukee did you...
St. Michael's? Is that what it was? I think St. Michael's or St. Joseph's. I get them confused, It's been a while since I was there. But, I love Wisconsin. I'm still a Packers fan and a Badgers fan.
Yes.
I mean, that stuff is imprinted on me from youth. So
even with Aaron Rodgers being traded?
I mean, listen, I'm a fan of the team. He's a great player, but he and Brett Favre, we can get into sports, but that it's so strange to me that those guys have so much talent and had such similar careers and are also deeply strange.
The Packers have had the strangest most vivid quarterbacks.
Yeah,
They're very vivid personalities and unconventional personalities. Yeah.
Did you get into it while you were living there? I mean, did you?
Yeah, I started in the 80s. I mean, do you remember what was his name? Don Wachowski or something?
Yeah, the Magic Man. I used to have a jersey. I had a number 7 Don Wachowski jersey.
He was crazy. Those games were wild. I mean, they were really fun to watch because he was kind of bad.
Well, but we had that one magical season, which was 1989. I mean, listen, I'm such a big-time Packers fan, but 89 was when we went, I believe, 10-6. And they had been terrible my whole youth. So that was the first season where they were like winning close games, and it was kind of a magical season. And
right, is it Makowski or Wachowski?
No, it's Makowski, the Magic Man. Yeah.
Right. He had that great receiver in Sterling Sharp.
Yes.
And that's partly how he pulled things out at the last minute. But the games were wild. And then poor Sterling Sharp, something happened to him. I think
he hurt his neck.
But didn't he go to prison or something?
No, that was Darren Sharper, I think, that you're thinking of. That's a grim story, yeah. But Sterling Sharp, he had a neck injury and his career was shortened.
Oh, he was such a brilliant player. He had a brother too, didn't he? Who played?
Tight end, yeah, Shannon Sharp, who played for Denver.
Yeah.
So anyway, and I mean, just while we're on this little like sports sidebar, as I was reading about you, prepping for this conversation, it was like, wow, Lorrie is musical. She can sing. She can play the piano a little bit. She's a wonderful writer. And then, and I, I'm just going to touch on this. I don't want to mean to talk about an author's child, but I know that I read somewhere in the prep that your son was like a really good soccer player. Is that right, first of all?
He was a good soccer player when he was a child, yes.
Okay, so
He's
I'm
a
just wondering, were you a good athlete? Is this athletic?
no,
Okay.
no, no, no. I had a boyfriend who was an athlete though, and he would say, "You are an athlete. You just don't. You're just not, you know, working it. You could do it." But I actually, and I did take a lot of dance lessons when I was. I took very serious ballet actually when I was a child, but I did not and because the ballet teachers actually, and the Russian one, these were all European teachers, so I had a Russian and a French teacher, but they look at how long your arms and legs are. That's really it, and then they try to work with you. But what they can't see is whether or not you really have the desire and will to do this. And I had long arms and long legs and was thin, but I did not have the desire and will to be a ballet dancer. And that's the jock gene. The jock gene is just kind of like the will to make your body do these things. I did not have that.
Okay.
So
So, yeah, I mean, ballet is particularly hardcore. I feel like ballet is especially punishing. That's a difficult
it is.
pursuit.
It is. It is. It
I don't
is.
understand. I don't understand how anybody wants to put themselves through that, but it is a sight to behold. Yet another thing I am deficient in my understanding of is ballet. I need to go to, I guess, opera and ballet, but when you see people who can really do it, it's, they're fantastic athletes.
They are. It's yeah. I remember hearing a ballet dancer being interviewed about what they did to keep in shape, and I thought that was the stupidest question I ever heard a dancer ask. It's like, hello, they dance,
Right. Right.
and they're dancing all the time. They don't have to do anything else. You have to be, the dancing will keep you in shape.
You would think,
And they
yeah.
have rehearsals, and they're at the bar every day.
The
The
dancing
bar,
bar.
the 2 R's in me, not the
Yeah.
drinking bar. Right? Yeah.
Okay. So this is we've gotten a little bit sidetracked, but I'm going to follow the question that I began regarding geography and your peregrinations and the travels that you've made through your adult life, teaching at the University of Wisconsin in Madison and living there, and I think you still live there at least part of the year.
I have a
And
house there.
yeah, and then moving later in your career down to Nashville to teach at Vanderbilt University. And what I'm interested in knowing about is how it has been for you to be a New Yorker and then a Midwesterner and then to move to the American South, because I feel like that factors into your new novel, at least somewhat. Is like you're now a Southerner to some degree, and that has to be its own kind of education to suddenly be in that culture because it is distinct from the Midwest. And I say this with some degree of knowledge because my parents are both from Louisiana and I have so much family in the South.
Oh, oh, interesting.
Yeah, but I
Interesting.
was raised in Wisconsin and then in Indiana, and Indiana actually has some Southern vibes, but um,
Yeah,
living,
Southern Indiana is the South.
that's for sure. And so to
Yeah.
be in Nashville, I'm just curious to know what that adjustment was like for you and maybe what it illuminated for you about the United States.
Well, I, you know, I wouldn't have chosen this life of moving from New York to Wisconsin, then to Nashville. But given that these are things I had to do to earn a living, um, I feel it has given me knowledge of the country that friends of mine who haven't lived anywhere else but New York, say, or Wisconsin, or I mean, it gives me additional knowledge and perspective. Um, there's a I don't know if you've met these kinds of provincial New Yorkers who demonize the South and Southerners and caricature them. without any actual knowledge of them, or knowledge of the great variety of people there, or the fact that, there are more black people in the South than there are in the North. Northern, white Northern progressives sometimes don't even know that. They
Well, they
say,
don't.
"Oh, let the
This is
South burn, let it go." And it's like, there's more black people in the South than in the North, and they go, "Really?" They don't know.
well, and the other thing I would say is that the South feels less segregated oftentimes than the North.
Sometimes it is.
You know,
Sometimes it is.
you have people from different races and backgrounds living in closer proximity to one another than even in a place like, Los Angeles. Milwaukee is a notoriously segregated city.
Notoriously segregated. Yep. Yep. So, right. So Northerners can get smug, and I'm a Northerner, but I don't like that kind of, I just feel there's complicated history wherever you live, and you either choose to look at it and acknowledge it, or you can just point to other places that you find inferior and feel better about it. But the South. The South is complicated, and it's constant. Nashville's changing so much. It's really, and many people feel it's no longer the South, Nashville. It's become so infiltrated. Infiltrated is maybe not the right word, but lots of people from California have moved there. Lots of people from Chicago have moved there. Um, and I'm sure there are places in Texas and other places in the South that have, like Austin is like that. Is Austin really a Texan city? I think the rest of Texas kind of rejects Austin in some way. And I think that the same way sometimes that Wisconsin rejects Madison as not really belonging to the rest of the state. And Nashville has a little bit of that. Tennessee is complicated. Um, but so I do feel I've been, but I also feel completely rootless. But I come from rootless people. My parents didn't have strong roots anywhere, and my grandparents didn't either. I had one grandfather who was an academic, and the other one was a sea captain. So they
Yeah,
both moved around. They were just moving.
that's how I feel. I don't feel like super rude. I mean, I've lived in Los Angeles longer than I've lived anywhere, but I'm not from here, and
Yeah,
I
Los
don't.
Angeles is a city of people who aren't from there,
Yeah,
right?
yes,
And
everyone. I mean, so many people.
Nashville's getting to be that way a little bit. So, yeah.
But I feel like Nashville. I don't know. Nashville
New
seems
York.
cool. It seems like an exciting place to live.
Well, it's in transition right now. There's so much construction, and everybody's complaining about it right now because it's just kind of growing without good um, boundaries or plans, and it's not, and good zoning and all of that. So we'll see where it lands, but there's a lot about Nashville that sort of feels thrown up in the air right now. And of course, COVID was very, very bad for the music scene there. It
Right.
used to be sort of a beautiful thing where you would go into any little coffee house or bar, and that young people were lined up to play for you for free. It was fantastic, but then COVID just put the kibosh on that. And I started hearing young people talking about moving to Chattanooga because Nashville had gotten also so expensive.
Hmm.
So we'll see. I mean, to be a young artist is hard. You have to, and New York has certainly gotten very, very hard for young people. And Nashville, I think, is getting a little hard for young people. I don't know about LA. LA is probably hard too, right?
It is. Yeah. The only thing that it has going for it is that it's so big. So there's a lot of room and space, and there's always it feels like there's always a neighborhood like further out east, which becomes the place. Wait, I don't know if we've exhausted every single one, though. Maybe we're on our way. But yeah, it's not simple, but it's easier, I think, than Brooklyn or Manhattan. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know by how many degrees. It's easier than San Francisco, and I think it's really just a real estate issue. It's just bigger,
Yeah,
so it can
yeah.
absorb more people. But you've gotten into country music, like you've kind of like adopted the culture a little bit that you're living in there in
Country
Nashville.
music was never my thing. I like Americana. So for instance, Lucinda Williams lives in Nashville. Shelby Lynn and Allison Moore live there. That's my kind of music. Steve Earle lives
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
The hardcore Conway Twitty country thing. I mean, Conway Twitty has a great voice, but I mean, I'm not really a hardcore country fan, but there's so many different kinds of music there because the infrastructure is there for recording. So all kinds. I mean, people like Bruno Mars and Harry Styles, and people like them come into Nashville to record because those studios are beautiful. They're built into little houses on Music Row, and there's a lot of studio musicians there. There are great sound engineers there, so it's a great place for music generally, and so it's not just the old-fashioned country music.
Hmm. So before I let you go, I want to talk a little bit about your writing, like how you actually get it done. You have described yourself as a slow writer, so I feel an immediate kinship with you because I'm slow too. But you
I
have been,
want to say, I haven't read your novel, but the title of it is so fantastic. Be brief and tell them everything. It's just so great. I
well, I
love that.
appreciate that. I appreciate that. It's like, maybe this is something we could discuss. Like my book is very autobiographical. It is fictionalized, but it's pretty close to the bone. Just that particular book, that subject matter, that's how it came out of me. Do you have hard, fast feelings about like what fiction should be? Do you have the kind of antipathy toward autofiction that I sometimes read about? It seems like people have strong feelings about it. I don't. Like I'm just wondering if you do.
I don't have I don't have strong feelings. I mean, sometimes you feel, oh, another, because I have to read a lot of stuff for admissions that come in for the for the graduate program, and sometimes you think, oh, another story about a Brooklyn writer who's working as a barista. I mean, there
Right.
are a lot of those.
Yeah, I can imagine.
um, but you know, if something's good, it's good. It'll be good for other reasons. It has to be good because because it's intelligent, and that its use of language is enlivening and interesting, and so a lot of it is tone and voice and a quality of mind that trumps I'm sorry to say Trump, but trumps the actual subject. You can take almost any subject and make great art out of it, even if it's being a writer in Brooklyn working as a barista.
Yeah, I
It's
mean, I think that's
doesn't
my
preclude
attitude. I, I,
great
f-
art.
I think what I say is like to myself anyway, and sometimes I'll say in conversation, is that if something succeeds on its own terms,
Yeah,
like that's the metric for me. So if somebody's writing
yeah,
like YA, then I'm not comparing it to, uh, Tolstoy. And I just feel
right,
like if a thing sets out to do something and it feels like it succeeds on those terms, then I'm a fan and I'm applauding it. And that's kind of
right.
the way that I look at it. But I'm curious to know when you sit down to work, like just I think listeners, especially writerly listeners, will be curious to know like how you work, how often you work. If you're slow, does that mean you're trying to work every day, or are you one of those writers who sort of works in bursts? I know you teach, so sometimes that means that it's the summer where you do a lot of the work. Like, just curious to know what it looks like for you.
Well, it has changed through the years. I used to say to people, because it was really what I did, that you have to write every day. Just accept that. And that it doesn't matter how much you write, but you have to write every day something. Um, Now there are days for me sometimes where I don't write every day. So I'm violating my own advice and rules. But you know, when when you have certain responsibilities or events in your life, I mean, you can't always give writing the priority that you would ordinarily like to. So you just a little catch as catch can. Um, if you can clear your life out and have just a year and a half of no other responsibilities, that would be a beautiful thing. But very few people can do that.
I was going to say, yeah, good luck with that.
Because I feel like my life is fairly privileged in that, um, you know, teaching creative writing at a nice school with nice people. I think this is a privileged kind of work, but I've never in my entire life, and I am 66, and I've never had a year and a half of no responsibilities but writing. But I do feel that's the key amount of time that would free you to do something really wonderful in an ordinary amount of time,
Right.
as opposed to, doing it in fits and starts over 6 years. So,
Well, but I feel like, maybe like just to play devil's advocate, this is what I will tell myself, that maybe if I had that year and a half, it wouldn't be good for the art. Like maybe there's something to be gained from that tension and from that, it kind of enforced downtime or being away from the work and wanting to get back to it. Or, it's sort of like when I think back to when I was an undergraduate and I would have a semester where I took like a ton of courses and I got better grades than the semester where I didn't. Sometimes having more to do makes you sharper or something.
right. And sometimes stolen time is really golden time. I used to sign up when I was young, I used to sign up for foreign language classes because I always wanted to learn like Italian or something. And then I would just stop going. I would skip the classes and then use that time to write.
Well,
So
it
it was
panned
like,
out.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
So,
Lorrie, I always ask people at the end of the conversation if they're working on anything new. And it's fine if you're not. I don't know what the state is, if you always have kind of an iron in the fire. But with this one now making its way out into the world, do you have other projects going, or are you in
I
between?
have, because of the 4 months in Berlin, I have another project brewing at a very beginning level. Um, but it will have a Berlin component, and whether it will be what shape it will actually take, I'm not sure. I mean, I have some characters, I have some themes. I don't know finally what I'll end up with, but we'll
No, I
see.
mean, is it a novel or is it stories?
Well, that's what I don't know yet.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That part, even that basic part, I can't quite figure out. I have a feeling it will be. Um, I have a feeling it won't be a novel, but we'll see.
Okay. Well, it is a thrill to have you on this show. I am so pleased to get the chance to talk with you. I know my
Oh,
listeners are going to be
thank
thrilled to hear
you.
from you. Congratulations on I Am Homeless, If This Is Not My Home. Great title, by the way. I understand you had to fight for it a little bit. Is that right?
I did, but thank you for liking it.
Yeah.
It was my working title from the beginning, and I just needed to cling to it, And my editor did think it was too long. The salespeople, I guess, thought it was too long, but it's working out.
It's
It's
working
not.
out.
It's not getting in the way.
All right.
So
Well, I appreciate the time. I know you're busy with tour and doing events. You're in New York right now, right? So,
I'm in New York, and I'm going upstate tomorrow to
okay.
Rhinebeck. They have a bookstore up there called Oblong Books that I've never been to, but I will be reading there. So
Okay. Well, listen,
thank you so
appreciate
much.
the time. Congratulations and best of luck on the nebulous Berlin project.
Thank you. Thank you very much.